Welcome to this short tutorial for Nebraska ESU Cooperative Purchasing's Easy Purchase System. Today's tutorial is on workflows. Workflows are the approval process that must be present within our instance to be able to complete orders. Every school's instance must have a workflow for orders to go through successfully. So today I'm going to show you a couple of examples of workflows, how to build them, and also the criteria that drive our approval processes. To access the workflow settings, we go through the Menu tab and select the Admin key. We go over to the Select Function box and go to Workflow Settings. First, we're going to go to Workflow Criteria. Workflow criteria are different items that are associated with every order. There are 4 criteria that I really like to build workflows around. One is payment form, which would be credit card or purchase order. Ship to attention. Ship to attention is essentially the requester, or the faculty member that's requesting the product ends up becoming the ship to attention, so they could be identified by individual parties within your approval process. Ship to location would be the buildings that you've built inside of your instance, so you could separate orders out by elementary, middle school, and high school. And transaction total, or a dollar amount associated with each order. Once I've assigned my criteria, and I can do so just by clicking on the item and putting it over into the Assign tab. So once I've built out the criteria that I can actually create an approval process or a workflow around, then I go back up to the Select function, Workflow Settings, and go to Add Edit Workflow. I'm going to build a workflow right now based around a transaction type. So I'm going to call this workflow Basic. When I hit go, since I already have Basic in the system, it's going to populate. If you're building this workflow in your system, you can call it whatever you want, and that title that you give it will default to this line. If I were creating it from scratch, I would select this green tab here, and it would bring me up to this field where I can now select from my criteria that we brought over from the workflow criteria field. I'm going to select transaction total. Then I'm going to say greater than or equal to, and then I'm going to give it a numerical value of 0. So now what this workflow is telling me that any time a transaction total is greater than or equal to 0, it will trigger this workflow, and this workflow will take a place, or this approval process will happen. So this is a very broad-scaping workflow that will catch any order going through the system. And if you're looking for one workflow for your entire entity or your entire district to catch everything, or one approval process, this is a very good one to add. As you see here, I have myself, and then I have the next tab, and then I can find anybody that I've designated from the Add Edit User function with approver privileges. I can find them in this field. In this case, I'm going to add Brenda. So what this workflow now tells us, because workflows read like a book from left to right, that any time a transaction total is greater than or equal to 0, Kip and Brenda will approve. I originally had this set to Kip next Brenda will approve. The reason you might want to do this is because you can actually edit a purchase order or quantities within your instance now if you watch the Edit Entity Settings video that's also attached to your shop page. And by enabling your instance to edit orders, you can then designate who can see these orders and which order they're going to see them. The method behind this would be if I say we're a principal and I got to say yes or no whether or not people got product or the product that they were requesting. So I would go first, and then I'm designating next Brenda, who I'm calling my business manager. And Brenda can actually go through and edit the purchase order number that somebody's put on there, maybe a last name or a number, as they're not familiar with what our next purchase order number is in our actual system or in our purchase order system. So I can actually go through and edit that PO number. The reason I'm putting myself the principal first and then Brenda next as my business manager is that maybe I'm going to say yes or no to orders, but Brenda's actually going to go through and encumber funds as they come through. And if I were next in the chain and not Brenda, then Brenda might go through and associate an actual purchase order number and encumber funds out of my accounting software. And then me, the principal, I might say no to that order or reject it. And then Brenda has to go back through and reconcile that purchase order number or those encumbered funds. So it's best that if you're going to do this process that you put the parties first that are going to be able to say yes or no to product, and then your business manager or the party that's encumbering funds and applying purchase orders second. Once I've built my workflow, I can select the Update tab. If you're building this for the first time, this field right here will say Add. If you remember when I was saying I like to build workflows also around ship-to locations, building a workflow around a ship-to location gives you the ability to have different approval processes for different buildings. So say you wanted a workflow for your elementary, and you wanted a separate workflow or approval process for your middle school, and a different one for your high school. So I could build one and call it Elementary A. Select the Go, and since this one does not exist, I can hit the Add New tab. The workflow priority box comes into play when you have multiple workflows in your instance and the criteria might be met by multiple orders. So then, if I give it a number of 1, that workflow is going to come first, and then the workflows that I have associated afterwards, the criteria are met, will take place after that. So a workflow with a priority of 1 will take place before a workflow of a priority of 2. An example of this would be if you use that basic one, where transaction total is greater than or equal to 0, but you might have another one that's transaction total greater than or equal to 500, where your superintendent has to approve. So you might make that superintendent one your workflow priority 1, so that we actually know that the superintendent's going to say yes, and then our basic transaction total greater than or equal to 0 would be workflow 2, so we don't actually go through the work of approving an order that somebody might actually reject later on in that approval process. But for this case, I'm just going to give it a random workflow priority number. Now what I can tell this now is if I click on this green button, is I can tell it a ship to location that contains elementary. And be very careful when you're doing this, because you want to make sure that what you're putting in this field, if you're using the ship to location as your criteria, that your actual location in the add edit location field in a prior video is the exact same name. Also, you want to make sure you avoid words like school if all of your locations have school inside of them, because it will catch all of those too, and it would have to go through all those different approval processes. If you want it to only go through one, you have to find a unique word that none of your other locations contain. You can also use the equals key if you wanted to say an exact name of your location. You also want to make sure to go through your add edit locations and make sure you're naming it exactly what your elementary's location is inside the system. Now, just like before, I can go through and designate a process of how I'm going to have these orders go. In this case, I'm going to say Kip and Brenda, and then I'm going to say next. So now this workflow, if we read it from left to right, means if a ship to location equals elementary A, Kip and Brenda both have to approve. Then Bill will approve. I could change this function to or, and either Kip or Brenda could approve this order, but Bill is always going to be the last person in this process. Once I've completed the workflow the way I want it, I can go ahead and hit the Add tab. And now I've added that elementary. I can do the same process for my other schools. So maybe it was middle school A. I can hit go. Add New, give it a workflow priority, hit the green Add tab, Ship to Location contains middle, or I can make it equal middle school A. And remember, make sure that this name, if you're going to use the equal function, matches the exact location name that you've given that location. Also, if you're going to use contains, you want to make sure that it doesn't have other information that our other workflows would contain, or else it will have to go through both workflows. Then I can build this out. So now I've built a workflow that says if ship to location contains middle, then Marilyn, then Brenda can approve. If I want to add multiple locations to the same workflow process, I can do that by adding this green button and say ship to location contains. This might be my high school. I want to be careful not to use the word school because my middle school might also be named middle school by the location. Or I could do the equals and do high school. Once I'm completed this workflow, I want to make sure that everything's correct. And in this case, I need to switch this symbol to OR because I have multiple locations. And both locations won't be matched because we only can ship one product to one place. So if I'm going to add multiple criteria down here, I need to make sure that this tab is switched to OR, so we know that if the ship to location contains middle or high school, then it will trigger this workflow. If we had it set at AND, then all of a sudden now our ship to location has to contain both middle and high, and we know that's not going to happen. So make sure that if you're going to add additional criteria here, that you put the OR function there so that it will actually only has to actually match one of those criterias. Once I've completed that one, I can now add that workflow. This completes our tutorial on workflow settings. If you have any questions about workflows or anything else within ESU Cooperative Purchasing, the ESU Cooperative Purchasing Easy Purchase application, or just about Nebraska ESU Cooperative, please contact myself, Kip Schneider, at 402-261-9405 or co-op staff at 402-387-1245. Brenda's at extension 101 and Priscilla's at extension 102. We'd all be glad to help you. Thanks, and you have a great day.